Marovek the Siege-Eater, also known as the Black Mason and the First Father. From the Killer and Keeper universe. Origin: born among a small cave tribe of giants in the frost-bitten cliffs of the Northern Maw, Marovek was a Cambial, half-born of ancient blood, tempered by cold stone and the brutal code of strength. His people were remnants of older wars, ossified into primitive rituals and raw might. Their society revered size, scars, and once deafening battle roar. They believed the gods lived inside the earth's bones, and that every wound bled became strength. Children were raised on marrow broth and thunder stories of ancient beasts. Initiation involved wrestling cave bears to the death, or fasting within skull-lined caverns, until vision came, or madness set in. Marovek's early conquests were crude and blood-drenched. He razed river vale camps with burning bone torches, shattered temple ruins with rocks the size of altars, and wore his enemies' jawbones as trophies. His youth was scarred with constant battle. Bone duels beneath stalactite-choked caverns, feasts laced with challenge rites, and the unending struggle to prove worth through violence. For years, he wandered across desolate tundras and charnel battlefields, carving his name into the flesh of tyrants and warlords alike. But when he crested the Ironstone Plateau and beheld the black plain where no stone stood, he did not raise his hammer. Instead, he set it down. There, amidst howling winds and ashes of old wars, Marovek began to build. With his own hands, he hewed the first stones of Grendhal, the sound of each strike ringing like judgment across the ash-strewn plain. The stone shrieked under his hammer, bleeding dust and history as if the land itself protested his will. His muscles tore and knit anew with every haul, sinew groaning against frost and memory. Blood mixed with mortar, and the scent of iron was as constant as breath. To the few who dared witness, it was not construction. It was a liturgy of fury. Each foundation block was a sermon, each spire a defiance of ruin. He carved sacred symbols of strength and siege into the stone with bare fingers, often until they bled. The walls did not rise. They clawed their way into existence through the marrow of a man who had made peace with neither gods nor ghosts, only legacy. From the ironstone cliffs, dragging them with chains forged from his past foes, each wall was laid with brutal precision, every tower shaped by battle memory and fortified by sheer will. Years passed. The citadel rose like a petrified god. Baroque battlements adorned with gargoyles shaped like fallen kings and weeping saints. Vaulted halls echoed with the dirges of storm priests and the grinding prayers of siege engines long silent. Few places in the world carried such grim reverence. It was not merely a fortress, but a cathedral to endurance, a bastion where blood, stone, and belief were forged into legacy, where bastions once held back storms and entire empires. Later architects of Grendhal, drawing from Marovek's furious liturgy of creation, adopted his methods into sacred rites. Each stone laid was preceded by a bleeding of the hand, each arch sealed with a thunder chant echoed from the original battlements. The architects themselves were no longer merely builders, but priest-masons cloaked in ash and bound by oath. Their blueprints were written in rust ink on cured hide, their tools passed down like relics. Structures bore names like the Silence Gate and the Hall of Bruised Oaths, commemorating not just design, but the suffering endured to raise them. To carve stone in Grendhal was to preach, to build was to bleed, and all who shaped its skyline swore the oath of Thren. We lift what cannot fall. It was not merely a fortress, but a cathedral to endurance, a bastion where blood, stone, and belief were forged into legacy, where bastions once held back storms and entire empires. Lineage, patriarch of the modern Grendhal line, his blood established the foundation for generations of siege-born warriors. Among his descendants, none raise a weapon without invoking his name. Shrines of black iron, bearing his likeness, stand in every warkeep of the Ironstone Plateau, and the walls of Grendhal itself are inscribed with his maxims in molten gold. Yet among these solemn halls, the echoes of his origin stir uneasily. The right of the devourer, though long outlawed, is whispered in cautionary tales and carved discreetly into the dark corners of Grendhal's foundations. Some descendants carry talismans of bone, not out of reverence, but remembrance, that even a godless legacy has ghosts. Every year, on the day of the first silence, a portion of the war kin gather to burn mock hearts of clay, symbolically casting off the old hunger. Two secretive factions emerged in the generations after Marovek, the Emberbone Circle and the Keepers of the First Silence. The Emberbone Circle, formed by radical warkin, believes that the right of the devourer was not a shame, but a crucible. They preserve its rituals in secret crypts beneath Grendhal, claiming that true strength must be claimed in blood and marrow. They see Marovek not as a reformer, but a prophet who tested and survived the god's appetite. Opposing them are the Keepers of the First Silence, a monastic order sworn to sever all remnants of the old ways. They burn bone talismans, scour ancient carvings, and seal forgotten chambers. To them, Marovek's legacy lies not in the right, but in its rejection. They maintain the Hall of the Broken Fang as a warning, a tomb of relics from the devourers, guarded day and night. In this way, Marovek is remembered and reviled, revered as the breaker of the old path, feared for the path he took alone. His memory is a blade held hilt first to his descendants, offered for strength, but sharp with warning. Barduan, the still, 7 generations later, is widely seen as Marovek's spiritual echo, a solemn torchbearer of the silence their patriarch once thundered into faith. Appearance: a towering colossus of a man, even among war giants. His skin was sunburned bronze stretched over slabs of sinew and old wounds, a canvas of conflict writ in scar and callus. Across his chest ran the diagonal slash from a Dune Lord's obsidian glaive, inflicted during the siege of Tharnval, where he tore down the Sunwatch towers under a hail of glass-tipped spears. The wound festered for months, yet he refused healing, declaring it the tax of victory. One shoulder bore the molten kiss of a storm priest's firebrand, seared into him during the burning of the Chalice Citadel. He charged through flame-wrought sanctums while others fled, pulling down the sanctum's altar and bearing the symbol like a stolen godmark. A lattice of whip scars crisscrossed his back, remnants of his cave tribe rites of endurance, earned beneath the howling maw during the trial of chains, where he stood lashed for a full moon's turn and roared only once, to silence the tribe's doubts forever. His left bicep held a jagged bite mark, fossilized in flesh from the maw of a cave worm he strangled at age 12. His hair, long and wild, was the color of scorched bronze, matted with ash and wind-snare debris, cascading down like smoke from a battlefield pyre. His beard, vast and untrimmed, poured down his chest like a tangled storm front, braided loosely with shards of stone, broken sigils, and one fused lightning talon from the hollow night. His eyes glinted like storm-lit granite, cold, unreadable, forged from siege fires. He wore armor only from the waist down, greaves of forged blackened iron, etched with the sigils of every fallen stronghold he had broken. His broad chest and gnarled arms were left bare, not out of vanity but defiance. Each scar a sermon of survival, each wound a warning. He wore no gloves, only calloused fists marbled with faded burns and blade marks. His silhouette was mythic, not a man, but a walking monument. Each step he took rang like a siege bell, a toll for the walls yet to fall. It is said Marovek descended from the oldest bloodlines of the killer, long before the lightning beast Atlas drew breath. His power was awakened not by prophecy, but by conquest. In his early days, he fought and killed a lone Hollow Knight, a being of ruinous lightning whose name was lost to fire and echo. Towering and gaunt, the knight was draped in armor of cracked obsidian and glassy cerulean veins, each plate inscribed with scripture that pulsed with the storm's heartbeat. It is said the Hollow Knight did not speak, but hummed a thunder hymn that turned blood to sparks. His blade, thin as moonlight and jagged as shattered ice, struck like forked lightning and burned with divine hunger. For 11 days and nights, the world watched in silence as these two titans clashed. Mountains wept, rivers fled their banks, and the skies wept black hail. It was the closest Marovek ever came to death. On the 12th dawn, with both warriors kneeling in ash and ruin, Marovek rose first and struck the final blow with hands bare and breath burning. He braided the broken sigils of the Hollow Knight into his beard, and from that moment forward, the air around him smelled of scorched iron and silent skies. No storm dared strike where he stood. Personality, absolute but not cruel. Marovek treated warfare as both arithmetic and sermon, quiet in council, thunderous in battle. He disdained speeches but believed strongly in example. Politics and scheming repulsed him. He considered them the domain of cowards cloaked in civility. He preferred the hammer over the whisper, the siege line over the throne room. If a thing needed doing, it should be done in full view, beneath sky and stone. His silence was heavy with certainty, not calculation, a bluntness that inspired fear in courts and faith in the field. This aversion shaped both his alliances and enemies. Among his closest allies was Hadran the Bastion Scribe, a mute tactician who communicated through stone carvings and led siege engineers with the same precision Marovek wielded Thren. After Marovek's death, Hadran sealed himself in the Hall of Iron Echoes, where he etched every battle they fought into the walls until his hands bled stone dust. When his work was complete, he vanished. Some say into the bones of Grendhal itself. Another was Uriel Van, once a condemned oathbreaker, who rose to command Grendhal's outer bulwarks after surviving 5 sieges and never once retreating. After Marovek passed, Uriel became the citadel's unyielding warder, maintaining the Black Watch for over 3 decades. He died standing, eyes open, at the gates during a red eclipse, his last breath rumored to have warned Bardun of the siege to come. On the other hand, Marovek's enemies were often born of ambition and envy. Lord Relther of Sablemere, a silver-tongued diplomat, tried to sway Marovek into a false alliance and lost his tongue for the attempt. His keep now serves as a granary for Grendhal. His descendants, stripped of title, are indentured stonehaulers beneath the Ironstone cliffs, their voices forever silent in tribute. Perhaps most notorious was Vexari the Gilded, a masked high priestess who plotted to poison Marovek with dream venom wine during a parley. He drank it knowingly, then crushed her temple with a single blow before the venom could claim him. Her body was never buried. Her gold-draped skeleton still sits at the base of the Grendhal cistern, where it weeps dew every solstice, a silent warning to would-be schemers. His disdain for intrigue became a sieve that filtered out pretenders and polished his legacy in iron and flame. In contrast, his truest allies often came from broken orders and wandering kinless, those who sought not power, but purpose in siege and silence. Ideology: if the gods speak through walls, then knock until they answer. To Marovek, belief was to be tested, physically. He saw sacred architecture as the truest scripture and siegecraft as revelation. He believed not in divine will, but in the sovereignty of the self. This conviction was born from his youth, under the brutal chieftain of his cave tribe, a towering figure named Kurgun, the Skull Taker. Kurgun ruled not by decree, but through ritual bloodshed and fearsome trials. His justice was meted by fang and fire, where failure meant dismemberment, and the worthy fed on the fallen. It was Kurgun who oversaw the rite of the Devourer, a bloodlit trial enacted beneath the Mawcrag's fang-shaped shadows. The rite began with combat in the pit. No weapons, no allies, only bone and teeth. The air was thick with blood howl and dread, and the walls, slick with past battles, seemed to watch. Survivors bore not just scars, but spectral terrors, visions of those they had devoured, gnawing at their sanity. Nightmares stalked their dreams, and many awoke screaming marrow songs or tearing at their own skin, believing themselves still within the pit. The trauma etched into their minds like carvings in bone, shaping generations of blood reverence and fear. Over time, the rite became less a trial of worth and more a descent into ancestral madness, a chasm from which few returned unmarked. Even centuries later, descendants flinch at its mention, and the wind through Mawcrag is said to carry echoes of chewing and weeping. In Grendhal's present, the trauma of the rite continues to manifest. Certain bloodlines bear hereditary madnesses, descendants plagued by night terrors and marrow visions, inexplicable cravings during ceremonial fasts, and uncontrollable rages triggered by the scent of burning bone. In the lower districts of Grendhal, alley priests still whisper parts of the old rite, promising forbidden strength in return for dark acts. The Emberbone Circle hosts clandestine blood duels, masked as training rites, to secretly rekindle the practice. Meanwhile, the keepers of the First Silence conduct public exorcisms during the Equinox Watch, where afflicted warkins scream and writhe as bone oil burns in sacred braziers. These tensions strain the fortress's unity, as memory becomes battlefield once more, not of land, but of lineage and legacy. Weapons, no allies, only bone and teeth. The victor, often too broken to stand, was dragged to the altar of marrow, where a high shaman carved open the defeated's chest with obsidian flints. The still beating heart was then pressed to the lips of the victor, who was forced to consume it in front of the tribe's roaring throng. Refusal meant death. Compliance meant brief glory and a lifetime of night terrors. Ritual markings were then carved into the flesh of the victor, using the femur of their foe, each sigil a monument to pain-made power. The stench of blood and burnt sinew marked every devourer's dawn. Marovek endured this without trembling, swallowing not just the heart, but the fear it was meant to sow. Marovek endured these horrors, not out of loyalty, but survival. Yet, as he grew stronger, he began to see the chieftain's doctrine for what it was, a prison of recycled pain and hollow supremacy. In time, Marovek slew Kurgun beneath the stone crag with a stone spike driven through his gut during a feast of strength. He proclaimed that no god nor monster should mediate might, that sovereignty must be earned, not devoured. In rejecting the cannibal doctrine, Marovek forged a new ideal, that legacy should not come from the bones of the fallen, but the stones one raises. From this crucible, he emerged convinced that the gods were merely echoes of fear, and that only action, not prayer, held true weight. To him, destiny was not gifted by gods, but forged through force and choice. Marovek rejected the notion of celestial guidance, asserting instead that one's hands must carve meaning into stone and consequence into legacy. His faith, if it could be called that, lay in the certainty of effort and the truth found in the crack of mortar beneath the hammer. Weapon, Thren, the silent hammer. Said to digest fortresses, it was forged from a splinter of Godor and a mountain's broken spine. Marovek claimed it during one of his earliest battles, when he faced and felled an 800-pound half-troll knight, known as Grusk the Undying, was more than a knight. He was a nightmare encased in flesh and steel. Spawned from troll and giant bloodlines, he stood nearly 10 feet tall, his bulk an avalanche of bone and sinew wrapped in barbed plate armor, fused to his hide by old curses. His breath stank of fermented blood and moss rot, and his voice gurgled like drowned thunder. Grusk carried with him the Doom-Tongue Maul, a thunder-warped weapon said to echo with the names of those it crushed. Wounds seemed to vanish from his flesh as quickly as they formed, his blood crawling back into place with a will of its own. In the northern wastes, entire villages told tales of his cruelty, of children hung from frost branches and war priests buried alive beneath cairns of ice. He was the wandering torment of the Iron Dells, believed unkillable, a god in the wrong skin. Few dared face him. None returned to tell how. After his death, the Iron Dells changed. The blizzard stilled, the echoes ceased to scream, and for the first time in decades, the moon shone unmarred by storm. Locals whispered that the land itself sighed in relief. Children were named after Marovek, and shrines were built from the shattered remnants of Grusk's lair, each altar topped with a cracked tusk or melted chain. Wandering seers claimed the death cry of the half-troll was still etched into the mountains, audible only to those born in winter. The Doom-Tongue Maul was never found, believed to have sunk into the earth, too cursed to be wielded again. But for those who lived in the dells, Grusk's fall marked more than just peace. It was a moment when dread was finally named, faced, and ended. The duel spanned 3 nights beneath a blood moon, ending only when Marovek shattered Grusk's skull and reforged the knight's weapon on a battlefield forge, binding its spirit in silence. Thren was wielded by none since Marovek until Barduon, 7 generations later. Campaigns. Marovek's legendary life was defined by countless battles, but among the most vivid and brutal were 4 that etched his name into myth. The Battle of the Barrow Spires. In his 40s, Marovek led a storm-clad vanguard into the Barrow Spires, a range of necrotic mountains infested by the Pale Vault, death-psalmist wretches who sang flesh into decay. The spires moaned with the wind of carrion hymns, and the bones of old heroes jutted from the earth like accusations. Marovek wrapped his ears in molten tar and waded into the chants, striking down a chorus of Vult with Thren, whose head glowed with spectral ichor. The battle ended when he shattered the echo pike, the sacred totem of their blight song, causing a tremor that collapsed half the range. The Vult fled screaming, their song stolen. The siege of Northern Maw. At 73, Marovek besieged the subterranean fortress of Northern Maw, ruled by the Deep Pyre Dwellers, a pyromantic cult who wielded pressure-forged fire and molten blood weapons. For 2 weeks, Marovek stood on obsidian bridges battling heat and flame, scorched bare, his skin splitting like old bark. He tore through the defenders with ember-blind rage, extinguishing the Maw's flame heart by plunging Thren into the volcano's throat, turning their godfire to stone. His charred silhouette stood unmoved for days, mistaken by many as a statue of vengeance. The duels of Hollow Mirth. At 120, Marovek entered the cursed glade of Hollow Mirth, a forest of black laughter, where duelists were summoned by the spirit of lost warriors. There, he faced 13 champions, spirits formed of old betrayals and unfinished duels, their weapons forged from memories and spite. Each night he faced one in single combat, with no sleep, no food, only blood and silence, his body blackened with soul-weeping cuts. But by the final duel, even the spirit host bowed, naming him Silence Given Form. The rending at Dreath's crown. In his 200th year, Marovek stormed the fractured fortress of Dreath's crown, held by the Iron Regent, a warlord encased in living armor that fed on the pain of its host. The Regent commanded bladed automatons and sorrow-bound wretches, but Marovek carved a path with Thren through siege fog and oil-slick halls. The final duel saw him rip the armor from the Regent piece by cursed piece, holding the weeping warlord aloft, before casting him into the teeth of memory, a chasm where broken oaths were set to scream forever. Each battle warped Marovek's form, his scars mapped like constellations of agony, his gait heavier, his silhouette denser with myth. Yet none diminished him. Instead, each wound became scripture. From youth to his final breath, he was not just warrior, but living siege, a force that history could not bury, only whisper of, in stone and fear. His most renowned conquest was the Sundering March, a decade-long campaign that broke 3 theocracies. The diamond bastion of the iridescent faith, reduced in a single night as Marovek tunneled beneath their prism walls with chained siege beasts, releasing molten tar and iron wasps into their sanctum. The moon altar of the luminous chorus, shattered by a blow to its subterranean heartstone. Marovek breached their skyward domes by dragging the bones of a dead mountain across their skybridge and letting gravity and faith collide. The archsanct of the searing creed toppled and buried in its own sacred fire. There, he strode through fire veils and silenced the hymn knights in a storm of ash and cinder. Before the Sundering March, during his early wanderings, Marovek waged a campaign across the frost-stained expanse, single-handedly disbanding the Order of the Fractured Chalice, a band of blight mages who fed their wards ice-laced poison dreams. He unmade their fortress, the Glass Vault, by collapsing its mirrored walls with a single throw of Thren. In the Vale of 10 Tongues, he silenced a conclave of blood priests who harvested oaths from dying men. Their altar, carved from the ribs of a sleeping god, now serves as the war table of Grendhal. The symbolism is deliberate, raw. Marovek's disdain for divinity was not cloaked in rhetoric, but chiseled into function. Where others might revere a god's remains, he repurposed them into a platform for mortal conquest. Each time war is plotted over those calcified bones, it affirms his creed. That destiny is not whispered from on high, but hammered into shape by those who dare seize it. The table stands not as a monument to worship, but as a declaration of defiance, a silent sermon that strength, not supplication, shapes the world. In every land he touched, a silence followed, not of peace, but of stunned awe, as if the world paused to reckon with the shape he carved into it. One such land was the drowned ridges of Helvak-Zur, a storm-lashed labyrinth of salt cliffs and flooded crypts ruled by the Maya king. A necromancer enthroned atop a ziggurat of drowned saints. The Maya king commanded an army of the preserved dead, crowned in coral, armored in seabone, and whispered commands through tide-stained scrolls. Marovek, armed only with Thren and a lungful of vengeance, waded into the salt-choked tombs. For 3 days, he fought beneath black rains and among barnacle-clad corpses, until he crushed the ziggurat's peak and drove Thren through the Mire King's tidal heart. They say the waters have not risen since. Another was the painted steppe of Kalsura, where sky painters rode hawks and cast illusions upon the clouds. There he faced the Caliph of Mirage, a dream warrior whose blade passed through armor and flesh alike, striking only memory and fear. Marovek broke the illusion by marching blindfolded, deafened with molten wax, striking with instinct alone until the mirage was slain and truth reclaimed the skies. The Caliph's petrified mask now hangs above the Grendhal wargate. In the Gorge of Thorns, Marovek clashed with the barbed legion, whose soldiers stitched bone hooks through their own flesh to carry the weight of their oaths, chanting liturgies of agony and sealess penance. Their faith was pain, their creed inscribed in scabs and scar tattoos. Each wound a prayer. They believed torment sanctified the soul, and the more barbs they bore, the closer they drew to divine clarity. The gorge ran red for a month. He crushed their bone tyrant by shoving his head into a forge pit, holding it there until silence replaced screams. The legion's banners were burned and mixed into mortar to repair Grendhal's southern wall, whose soldiers stitched bone hooks through their own flesh to carry the weight of their oaths. The gorge ran red for a month. He crushed their bone tyrant by shoving his head into a forge pit, holding it there until silence replaced screams. The legion's banners were burned and mixed into mortar to repair Grendhal's southern wall. In the tunnels of Rusknal, Marovek faced the coil scent, a serpent-bodied prophet who wove prophecies from the entrails of those he consumed alive. They fought in absolute darkness, Marovek navigating by the brush of cold scales and breath of decay. He severed the saint's many limbs one by one, finally pinning its shrieking head beneath a spike of Thren until even prophecy bled out. In the iron marches of Solveran, Marovek confronted the brass warden, a siege colossus made of enchanted bronze and powered by the hearts of captured warriors. For 3 days, they battered one another atop the Black Causeway, each strike collapsing bridges and echoing across the highlands. Marovek finally brought the warden down by wedging Thren into its open chest plate and detonating its core with the captured breath of a storm giant. Solvran has never again raised walls. And in the Marwound Fen, he hunted the Crow Mother, a witch beast of tar and crowbone who sowed madness through song. She wept obsidian tears and fed on grief, creating shrines of screaming faces. Marovek fought her knee-deep in cursed mud, his mind gnawed by hallucinated regrets, until he ripped out her throat and cast her skull into the burning fen. Her song still echoes in the reeds, though none dare hum it. It is said that those who do are seized by visions of their own buried griefs, their regrets dredged up in whispered harmony until they cannot speak without weeping ash. Some say the reeds near the skull moan when the wind passes through, shaping her lullaby anew. Others claim a wanderer once dared hum the first few notes and was found days later, lips torn and eyes hollow, muttering in tongues no scholar dares translate. Her silence was earned in pain, and few dare tempt its return. Among his lesser-known, but no less harrowing conflicts was the siege of Gorak's Maw, a petrified crater fortress ruled by plague eaters who consumed the disease to absorb their strength. Marovek shattered their bone spire with Thren, only to descend into a blood-slick pit to battle the Maw-keeper, a swollen abomination stitched from hundreds of fused bodies. They fought in the dark, where screams had no echo, and Marovek emerged, tarred in black blood, dragging half a ribcage as proof. In the rotfield of Dereth Cairn, he battled the Lantern Host, a legion of undead monks carrying soul lanterns that fed on fear and memory. Their chants flayed sanity, but Marovek deafened himself with molten lead and charged through. He shattered their relic lanterns, causing their spirits to scatter like ash in a storm. In the shale Maw Barrens, he confronted the Hollow Sire, an ancient armor-entombed horror who fed on voices and whose arrival was always heralded by a hush that crushed speech and song. Marovek challenged him in silence, wrapping Thren in chains dipped in the blood of bards, and struck until the ground broke and the hush bled out. And in the sky furnace of Durnagel, he faced the star-wrought, an alchemical titan forged in the core of a fallen comet, armed with burning gears and limbs of celestial ore. They clashed among magma furnaces suspended in the sky, until Marovek shattered its fusion core and rode its collapsing body into the valley below, branding the land into glass. At age 232, Marovek stormed the bastion of Thrall, a sky fortress suspended by titanic chains. He shattered its moorings by heaving the sundered leg of a war beast, collapsing the fortress into the valley below. The blood mist reigned for days. At 367, he waged the siege of Cindervolt against the Emberborn, a caste of fire-blooded warlocks who encased themselves in ever-burning bronze. Marovek fought atop melting battlements, dragging Thren like a plough through flesh and flame. By 509, during the Battle of the Tenfold Pyre, he fought and slew the pyromancer siblings of the Crimson Canticle. He survived 7 simultaneous immolations by smothering the flames in the bodies of the dead, killing the last sibling with a knee driven through her skull against her own altar. At 665, in the siege of the Worldbone Spiral, a sacred ossuary spiral descending into the earth, he killed the bone rites of Dalharak, who animated war dead in fractal patterns. He fought blind for hours through bone storms, finally impaling their spine priest on a pillar of skulls. At 791, he fought the Blade Sister of Skor, an 8-limbed assassin cultist draped in ribbons of flayed skin. They battled across a bridge of flame where each step burned flesh and memory. Marovek caught her with one hand, mid-lunge, and crushed her ribs with the haft of Thren. emotion as much about finality as fury. In that moment, the bridge of flame seemed to hush, the burning silence more profound than any battle cry. For years, she had haunted the dreams of generals, a spectre of inevitability, and with her ribs shattered against ancient iron, that shadow lifted. Marovek did not roar in triumph. He only stared, smoke rising around him, aware not of victory but of weight, the ending of something long whispered in blood. That death lingered in the minds of those who watched, not as vengeance, but as exorcism. These were not just battles, they were reckonings where myth was tested and broken against flesh and thunder. Among those who followed him, many carved their own legends in his shadow. Hakon Blacktooth, once a pit fighter of the Gorge Rings, trained under Marovek after surviving a trial by scars. He later led the Siege Choir, a war band that chanted the names of their slain as a rhythm for battle. Hakon died at the base of the shattered spire, clutching a banner made from the skin of his foes and a shard of Thren, gifted by Marovek himself. Then there was Kaldra Vainhunt, a siege savant who served as Marovek's scribe and strategist. She walked barefoot over coals each morning to mirror the pain Marovek endured. Her treatise, The Weight of Iron, remains canon in Grendhal's war colleges. Opposing him were legends in their own right. General Sorveth of the Gilded Phalanx spent his last 7 years preparing a defensive labyrinth meant to trap and starve Marovek's armies. Marovek walked through it in 3 days, burning the heart tree of Sorveth's capital, leaving the general bound to it with molten wire as a warning. There was also Imara the Pale, a prophet warrior whose chorus of blindfolded witches foretold Marovek's doom for decades. When they finally met in the fields of Bloodrest, she begged him to spare her so that her visions might persist. He granted her silence instead. To his allies, Marovek was the furnace. To his enemies, the tide. To both, he was a reckoning. Hakon Blacktooth's siege choir outlived him by a generation, evolving into a sacred brotherhood that chants oaths and dirges in battlefields still soaked in ancestral blood. Their echoes are said to embolden the soul and shatter cowardice. Kaldra Vainhunt's war theory reshaped siege doctrine across the Grendhal Plateau. Her successors, the Ember Minds, now lead the Warcant schools, instilling a brutal, mathematical reverence for strategy and pain. General Sorvet's failed labyrinth became a sacred ruin, frequented by tacticians who meditate among its crumbling walls to better understand futility. The remnants of Imara the Pale's coven fractured into the Dustborn Choir, witches who sing wordless laments in battle, mourning the silence she received, each note an attempt to reach where her voice was cut short. These factions do not merely honor Marovek or his foes. They war among themselves in fractured interpretations of legacy and power. The Siege Choir and the Ember Minds, once forged from shared reverence, now clash over doctrine, whether strength lies in fury or in foresight. The Dustborn Choir rejects both, whispering that silence is the truest inheritance. In Badun's time, their skirmishes flare at the borders of old battlefields, each faction claiming sacred ground as proof of righteous descent. Some seek to ally with Badun, seeing him as the keystone to their fragmented truths. Others see him as a heretic to their scripture, his wanderlust and disdain for dominion, an affront to the legacy they sanctify. These tensions erupt into duels, ambushes, uneasy truces. Bardun moving through them not as a leader or martyr, but as a storm that reshapes belief with each step. Perpetuate the thunder he left behind, reshaping war, silence, and memory across centuries. Bardun, Marovek's spiritual echo, would encounter the legacies of each in his wandering crusades. The siege choir, now cloistered in basalt monasteries, offered him sanctuary and a dirge blessing before he entered foreign battlefields. The Ember Mines challenged his every move with riddles of flame and tactics honed by Kaldra's brutal truths. Bardun refused their titles, but carried their influence like a wound, silent, deep, and smoldering. From the Dustborn choir, he heard a single lament beneath a dying moon, a soundless gift that steeled his blade and allowed him to spare a soul he would have otherwise slain. And in the ruins of Sorvet's labyrinth, he found the bones of a young strategist who died reciting his name as a symbol of unwavering resistance. These encounters did not chain Bardun to Marovek's legacy. They refined it. He was not the same forge-hammered patriarch. He wandered. He chose. Yet in every chant, every ruin, every echo of iron prayer, Bardun bore the mark not of inheritance, but of burden embraced and shaped anew, and broken against flesh and thunder over the course of his staggering 831 years, a lifespan unheard of even among war giants. Marovek fought in over 100 campaigns, from the volcanic sieges of the Ember Fissures, where rivers of fire laced with bone ash cut through fortress after fortress, and the air reeked of scorched marrow and molten obsidian, to the thunder marches across the spine of black suns, a shattered mountain range perpetually cloaked in ash storms and electric haze, where each footstep echoed like a drumbeat against hollowed stone giants buried beneath. He was the living pulse of war through centuries. Time weathered his bones but never dulled his resolve. Each generation that rose found him still at the front, a monument in motion, never retreating, never resting. Every scar, a record. Every silence, a chapter. Marovek's strength was a myth incarnate, said to have once stopped a charging Stonehorn bull with a single backhand, and to have uprooted siege towers when the soil refused to yield. At his peak, he hoisted war gates on his shoulders to use them as shields, and flung broken catapults as javelins into enemy battalions. During the siege of Cindervault, he dragged a molten chain, sizzling with cursed runes and sparking with dying screams, through enemy lines. The heat blistered stone and liquefied flesh, the stench of scorched sinew choking even the Emberborn. Screaming metal sang under his grip, echoing like war hymns forged in torment. He wrapped the chain around the throat of a brass colossus, its glowing eyes hissing in protest, and toppled it into its own forge, sending a gout of slag and steam skyward that turned night into agony-lit dawn. Through enemy lines, wrapping it around the throat of a brass colossus before toppling it into its own forge. When surrounded by 70 oathbound at Blackmaw Hollow, he spun with Thren in both hands, cleaving through steel and bone alike unto the last fill weeping. His was not mere strength of limb, but of will, a brute permanence, a storm made flesh. His name became a weight. To invoke it was to summon dread, awe, and the memory of stone cracking beneath an unyielding stride. His body bore the cartography of war, an atlas of wounds, cauterized by fire, sealed by frostbite, and jagged with blade memory. His right shoulder was warped from deflecting the molten strikes of the Emberborn. His left thigh bore the brand of the Caliph's illusion blade, a scar that shimmered under moonlight with shifting, spectral pain. One of his ribs, cracked during the siege of Thrall, never healed straight and hummed when storms drew near. These wounds were never hidden. He wore no armor on his chest or hands, displaying his ruin like a sacred script. Over time, his reputation became not just one of might, but of endurance, of a man so steeped in pain and time that he seemed no longer bound by either. To his enemies, he was inevitability. To his allies, he was the measure by which all resolve was judged. Even in old age, Marovek accepted duels with terrifying grace. At 791, he fought the Blade Sister of Skor, an 8-limbed assassin cultist draped in ribbons of flayed skin. They battled across a bridge of flame where each step burned flesh and memory. Marovek caught her with one hand mid-lunge and crushed her ribs with the haft of Thren, a motion as much about finality as fury. In that moment, the bridge of flame seemed to hush, the burning silence more profound than any battle cry. For years she had haunted the dreams of generals, a spectre of inevitability, and with her ribs shattered against ancient iron, that shadow lifted. Marovek did not roar in triumph. He only stared, smoke rising around him, aware not of victory, but of weight, the ending of something long whispered in blood. That death lingered in the minds of those who watched, not as vengeance, but as exorcism. At 812, he challenged the twin champions of Teldra Hollow, Pirak the wolf-skinned and Vale the iron-tongued, on a ridge of storm-split obsidian. With one eye bleeding and his leg broken from the knee, he felled both, hurling one from the cliffs and beating the other into the stone until the earth split. His last battle was waged in the Vale of Hollowed Horns at the age of 823, where he felled the war saint of Pale Mercy with a shattered arm and bleeding lungs, standing until the enemy fled before his unbowed shadow. The aftermath of these late-life victories rippled through the realms. The Blade Sister's cult collapsed within weeks of her death, its followers casting themselves into the ash-marrow chasm, believing their fate severed from the weave of death. In Teldra Hollow, the stone Marovek split during his duel with the twins became a pilgrimage site known as the Breaker's Maw, where warriors carved their names into the obsidian before battle, praying not to win, but to endure. The war saint's fall sent a shockwave through the faith-bound cities. Temples of Pale Mercy hung their bells upside down in mourning, while the saints' apostles burned their own scriptures in despair. Solvaran disbanded its war caste, and its forges were sealed under edict. The decree was met not with unified praise, but with a division that echoed through generations. Some wept with reverence, grateful to see an age of fire ended. Others cursed in silence, melting their armor into heirlooms and sharpening plowshares in the dark. Legends tell of the Ember Sworn, a hidden sect that lights forge fires in secret, their anvil prayers a defiance sung beneath the roots of the city. Meanwhile, children born in the sootless era are told bedtime tales of the brass warden's fall as both caution and prophecy. Should Solvaran grow soft, the earth may one day breathe fire again. In the Mirewound Fen, croplands grew where curses once thrived, though none till near the burnt skull. Marovek's deeds became scripture to others, etched into shields, echoed in chants before sieges, carved into the thighs of oath-sworn brutes. In the twilight of his years, his legend did not dim. It darkened, grew heavier, more sacred. The world did not merely witness his end. As he sat in silence atop the ruined throne of obsidian and rust, a storm of ash whispered through the veil. Moss grew along the blade-marked stones, and carrion crows circled but did not land. Beneath him, the soil had turned black, not from death, but from the sheer weight of memory. His final breath was a growl, swallowed by wind. And when the sky cleared, all that remained was the imprint of his seated form scorched into stone, and Thren, buried headfirst beside it, humming ever so faintly with each passing dusk. It braced itself, knowing it would echo long after the hammer fell silent. Legacy. Marovek's body never failed in battle, and none ever bested him in life. He died of old age, seated in the garden of his keep beneath a sky veiled in ash-colored dusk, the scent of iron still thick in the air. The garden, once a training ground, layered with shattered stone and blood-slick soil, had been overtaken by silence and ivy, a green quietude pressing against the blackened walls. His breath slowed like the cooling of forge fire, his hammer resting beside him like an old sentinel finally at ease. The scars across his flesh no longer burned. They simply were. Wind stirred through the silent statues of broken foes and fallen friends, and the horizon, ever smoldering in his mind, flickered one last time in his eyes. He had long hoped that his people, those born of siege and silence, would one day lift their gaze from the walls they built to the world beyond, that they would wield their strength not only to defend, but to dream, that the legacy of Grendhal might be more than endurance, that it might carry wisdom in its weight and forge peace from the embers of conquest. His final words, barely louder than a rustle of leaves to a waiting scribe: "One day silence will return, and someone will listen." View of Bardun. Though he never met Bardun, many believe he would have seen in him not a descendant, but a successor. Not with pride, but with gravity, recognizing that in Bardun the silence had returned, and the question of faith would again be asked with iron. And yet, beneath that gravity, there would have stirred a silent pride, hard and unspoken, like the weight of a well-set stone. For in Bardun's stillness, Marovek would have recognized the same furnace-born certainty, the same disdain for hollow rites and ornamented weakness. He would not have wept nor smiled, but he would have watched, unblinking, and known that the hammer had been passed, not dropped. Yet Bardun diverged in action where Marovek once built. Instead of fortifying walls or sitting atop thrones, Bardun chose the path of the wandering burden, walking through war-burnt groves and crater-ridden valleys, seeking not power but trial. He once faced the hollow choir of Elthane, a cult of sound wielders who sang bones into splinters, echoing the thunder hymns of the hollow knights slain by Marovek. Unlike his forebear, Bardun silenced them not with force, but by enduring every note until their voices cracked in disbelief. When he walked from their ruined chapel, its stones hummed no more. He crossed the sable divide where relic guardians, half stone, half memory, tested all who bore blood of Grendhal. There he disarmed them by casting Thren into the chasm and standing unarmed, daring fate to move him. No strike fell. The guardians bowed and crumbled, their purpose fulfilled. In the wane tombs of Hir, he was challenged by the Lorn Crown, a war cleric bound in chain mirrors and grief. Bardun defeated him not through might, but by shattering each mirror with truths of Grendhal's bloodied legacy. With each confession, the Lorn Crown's bindings unraveled, until he knelt and wept for the first time in centuries. Word of these acts spread. In Grendhal, elders divided, Some saw disgrace, others revelation. The Emberbone Circle branded him a coward. The keepers of the First Silence called him a purifier. Wandering priests etched his path in salt on their thresholds, while exiled warkin traced his steps, seeking meaning in silence. In truth, Marovek would have respected Bardun more for this choice, to turn from the politics of legacy and refuse the fetters of heritage was not weakness, but clarity, an act of will Marovek had longed to see in his line. Where others sought to command through tradition, Bardun walked alone. And in doing so, he earned not the hammer, but the silence between its strikes. The legacy, not of conquest, but of understanding its cost. He once faced the hollow choir of Elthane, a cult of sound wielders who sang bones into splinters, echoing the thunder hymns of the Hollow Knight, slain by Marovek. Unlike his forebear, Bardun silenced them not with force, but by enduring every note until their voices cracked in disbelief. He crossed the Sable Divide where relic guardians, half stone, half memory, tested all who bore blood of Grendhal. There he disarmed them by casting Thren into the chasm and standing unarmed, daring fate to move him. Where Marovek conquered, Bardun defied. Where Marovek built, Bardun wandered, reshaping not lands, but the weight of legacy itself. Through broken lands, seeking battles not to conquer, but to test his strength against the chaos of the world. He wore no crown, commanded no council, and claimed no stone seat. Many of Grendhal's elders whispered of wasted legacy, but others saw in Bardun a deeper echo of Marovek. Not the founder of keeps, but the reminder that strength must ever walk among the ruins it seeks to defy. In truth, Marovek would have respected Bardun more for this choice, to turn from the politics of legacy and refuse the fetters of heritage was not weakness, but clarity, an act of will Marovek had longed to see in his line. Where others sought to command through tradition, Bardun walked alone, and in doing so, earned the strength Marovek once wielded like a blade. Thanks for venturing into the storm with me. Every tale in this universe, from the shattered kingdoms to the cursed bloodlines, I write myself. All the art, all the visuals, every drop of atmosphere you feel, that's shaped by hand and pieced together with my passion to create. These stories take a lot of time to make real, so thank you for your patience when the drops take longer than I'd like. If you felt something during this journey, if you got goosebumps, held your breath, or just needed a break from the noise of the real world, do me a solid. Like the video, subscribe for more, and share it with a nerdy friend who needs to touch grass or get scorched by Atlas's lightning. Your support keeps this storm alive.